So first of all, welcome to everybody that is joining online. We have a few technical issues here with the camera and all. We'll figure it out by next week. We're learning also because we're doing this in a very different way than in previous years. First of all, I want you to know, right, like that I'm here with a group of students at the University of Maryland. You can say hi, everybody. Don't be shy. Just say hi. All right. This is the seminar on development challenges at the School of Public Policy. I have been giving this seminar for, this is my 5th year already in a row, and they keep bringing me back. So I'm probably doing something right, hopefully. So at least I'm not doing something terrible, but maybe this is the year, right? Especially because I'm broadcasting where I do something terribly wrong and they got me completely from last year. Hopefully it won't be the case. So my name is Mario Picon again, and now I'll complement a little bit the information that I gave you in the beginning. So here's the thing. I'm a development economist, originally from Peru. And when I was studying economics at college at the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú, commercial, right? In case anybody here is seeing me from Lima. Like my school at Católica was very particular and had something that other schools in economics in Peru didn't have. It was in the same college, in the same school as anthropology and sociology. So number one, the kind of exposure in terms of classes during breaks and all, the conversations between sociologists, anthropologists, and economists was arguably one of the most enriching experiences of my life. And also the parties were amazing. So, so this experience has always stayed with me in the sense that I appreciate very much the value of diverse perspectives on different issues. I try, even though I probably many times fail to, right? Like to be very much open and not be close to the perspectives that others may bring. I'm not perfect also, and I have my own biases, right? Especially as I'm getting older. I was actually trained like to be a macroeconomist. So I was supposed to actually enter the Central Bank of Reserve. I went to the summer school. I was a research assistant at the time in different areas actually of the Central Bank of Reserve. It was a great experience. And everybody at that time wanted to work in the Central Bank of Reserve if you were from economics in Peru. It was, actually is, one of still the most reputed institutions in the country. Also because, like, given a structural adjustment in the early 90s, after a terrible phase of inflation that basically destroyed the middle class, including many families like mine, right? I had to live basically based on fellowships and scholarships all around. At least my grades sustained me, I guess. But as I was really just pursuing this career in macroeconomics programming, econometrics, etc., because macroeconomics saves the country in many ways, right? Like once a very close friend told me that he had been invited to do a field work for an evaluation to the Amazon region. Now I want you to understand something. When I was growing up, right, like you could actually not get out of Lima. During the years of terrorism in the late 80s, it was actually very dangerous to just explore and just go. It's not like in countries that are more peaceful, including here, that you will go with your dad for fishing on a weekend to a lake, etc. We have amazing places. Seriously, go and visit Peru. I mean, if you haven't, right? Like it's awesome, right? There's so much to see, especially outside of Lima. Lima is great for food, like Bohemian life, amazing. But it's like this fieldwork in this sense, like in a time in which things started to open up, after a period where violence was the general image that you had of the country, right? Like it did change my life in many ways. And it was the experience that actually tilted me towards working in development. And I have never looked back, despite all the different frustrations, right? Like the highs and lows during my career, right? Like I know that I'm at heart like a development worker. And there is a lot of attachments to that particular term, a lot of biases, there's an aura to it, but also a lot of criticism around the work that we do. So in this moment of transition in which we have so many limits and challenges, right? It is that we're proposing to you as a team with my colleagues Tracy and Atida and Leah that you are seeing online too. Hi guys. This course. This course is an open class where we will have both people attending for credit, but we're also going to open it to you out in the world. We know that the time will not be very convenient, right? Like most of you probably, I bet, and you'll have an opportunity actually to chat and tell us where are you from, right? Like, are from Latin America, I want to bet that, or from the United States, right? Because of the time. Right now, it's the middle of the night in Africa. It's very early morning, so I doubt that you're connected, but you are great. We'll see in a moment from, I don't know, the Philippines, from Thailand, from China, because we have people from everywhere connected to this. So let me just guarantee you that what we want to do is to promote community through this. So it doesn't matter, right? Sometimes you will be able to connect. Sometimes you will be able to follow through in the classes. We're gonna, in other sessions, have breakout groups, right? Like where you're gonna be able to know each other and all. But every Tuesday, you will receive all the material that has been shared, including the recording of this class, for your benefit, so you can go over it. We are offering a Governance Action Hub R4D certificates of attendance, but getting those are not going to be based on attendance because we know that you are not going to be able to attend necessarily 14 sessions. We understand that. But if you are able to follow the material and go through a quiz that we're going to give you at the end of the semester, right, you will get your certificate. So more details are going to be shared on the text box and so by Tracy, Natida, and Leah as we're continuing with this. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. People are commenting. That's why I'm thank you to the cafe in this sense. Again, we'll figure about the logistics, right, and the camera and all better. I promise. This is the first time that we're able to actually get into this room because, like, as people here know, and I'm not lying, we have been secluded 1 week because of the snow and the ice outside. We actually were supposed to start last week. That was going to be a session only with you guys first before we had the online meeting. But then things happen, right? And we just have to adapt. So we hope and we vow to actually do it better for next week. So let me go through the material and what is it that we're going to go through. Natira, you can pass the slides, please. Maybe to slide 17, the current moment, okay? So we have very much like an identity crisis in the development space, right? Like, yes, the first thing that we think about when we think about the international development space right now is the closing of USAID. But there is much more than that, right? Like, certainly, over the years, we have, regardless of like the good results that we have seen in many countries around the world, right? Like international development, sometimes when you close with USAID, you are thinking, oh, like one of the arguments was that that money was actually not good or was not actually achieving much. And that is not true, right? Like there are a number of improvements in people's lives over the last few decades that probably we don't have the randomized control trial for that probably, right? Like without that money from development, right, probably would not have been possible. Or maybe yes, right? Maybe a different path. I'm not going to insist on that. I'm not going to oversell it, right? But the truth is like the remaining challenges are huge. Persistent inequality, democratic backsliding, climate disruption, geopolitical fragmentation. Now, can we together with others look at a new approach of development? How is it that in this time in which development is in crisis, we're able to think about and build through action, right, a better way to do international development? This is not something that I'm making up. this is something that people are actually actively working around the world on. Not only in the US, not only in Europe, in many places in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, right? Because people don't stay still, just waiting for the next round or like for USAID to come back. People are not necessarily moving on either. What they are is trying to rebuild a field that had a lot of issues also. So how is it that we rebuild better? So I propose you basically an exploration, not a blueprint, right? Like how is it that we can over time build together a new approach to international development that goes from this time to time of crisis, right? With different lenses, particularly issues related to justice, systems, governance, and community-defined change, right? And what is it that we may be able to find on the other side? What is the ecosystem of collaboration? Natida, can you move to the ecosystem of collaboration? Or, yeah, you can actually keep that slide of an exploration, not a blueprint, so people can familiarize a little bit with it, right? And what is it that we're going to do? And then you can move in maybe a minute or so to the ecosystem of collaboration. So what we're proposing here, right, is that because I happen to be the founder and director of this initiative called the Governance Action Hub, right? And I told you about a little bit about the network that we have and all, right? Like we have here an opportunity where UMD students can actually train themselves in facilitation as curators, as researchers, in a direct interaction with people that are actually participating and are global practitioners trying to tackle many complex challenges out there in development. And what we're going to try to provide here is a platform to be able to do that. So anybody that wants to join over time, you don't have to even join every week for this. You're going to have access to a platform. It's going to start with a Miro board and then something that is going to look a bit more sophisticated, where you're going to be able to, when you, and I'm talking to here for external participants, are able to participate, to collaborate to the solution or the answer to a particular question, a particular problem, you're going to be able to raise your hand and actually propose something. Now, what we are going to do with that is that this is going to be an exercise in collective intelligence, being able to actually like generate concrete proposals on how to move forward, right, on concrete development challenges. And as we're going to see, all this work that you are able to do is going to be attributed, and you are going to be co-authors on a collective publication that we're going to get together out of this class. I'll explain. Now, we don't seem to have the facility in this call. That's what Tracy was telling me, like to do groups, right? Like, but in a moment we're gonna divide over here, and we'll give 10 minutes for the people that are connected online to get to interact around a couple of questions. So just follow us through on this piece. So Natida, you can move to the slide on who's in the room. So as I explained the people in the class, right, like I want you to see like your particular skills, expertise, your background, your biases, right, as potential contributions to the solution on concrete problems. And this is going to be an exercise in the collective deliberation, right, towards proposing concrete solutions to common problems. And what you're going to realize is that you're going to be exposed to a number of different perspectives to yours. And that's the point. We're going to make that tension productive. You can move to the next slide. Okay? We work in explorations, right? Like, because we don't know like, necessarily what the answer is. We're going to remain open to different pathways that make sense given particular context. core design principles, Natira. Next one. Okay. So we are going to be talking a lot about strategies. These are some of the concepts that we're going to be exposed to, both in the classroom and as external participants. We're going to be exposed to the idea of strategies. We're going to be talking about asynchronous facilitation and asynchronous engagement. We're going to be talking about facilitation as practice, right? We're going to be talking about attribution and traceability. How is it that we can actually like register your contributions, your solutions, your suggestions on how to tackle a problem, right? And how do we attribute those? And we're going to be trying to make sense of the issues progressively. So at the end, in the last week of the course, we are actually going to have the chance to bring together everything that we have generated during the semester, and everything is going to be go into a meta Miro board. The meta Miro board, with the help of different facilitators and some of you too, right? Like, it's going to be our contribution as a class to the international development field. Now, think about this, okay? There's going to be a publication coming out of this at the end of the year. And the point is that that is not the end of the story. If they don't find it, okay, next spring, when we teach this class again, right, we're going to start not from zero. We're going to build over what you produce. Because this doesn't stop. Because the chances are, no, I can tell you with certainty, we're not going to find all the right answers here. Because the process is going to be messy. The process is going to be acknowledging complexity, right? And because if it was easy, right, probably somebody else would have found the solutions. Next slide, Natira, so they see the meta board. And yes, we're going to share all the material with everybody on the call and also with the students. Okay? So we're going to go through a section, and you can pass, Natira, maybe one more. So we are aligned. I don't know if you see the image, my camera, but you can see the slide that I'm currently explaining. So maybe that's helpful. When I move that, just change that, the one that you have in the share deck. Okay? So first, we're going to try to understand development for whom and what is the goal that we're trying to pursue. That's going to be first. Then we're going to try to understand systems, the concept of systems in development, right? How people are applying it, the limitations and the advantages to it. And then we're going to talk about strategy. We're actually going to devise a strategy to try to tackle some of these problems. This strategy is not based on what you may think that is the problem. It's going to be based on your readings, it's going to be based on your research, and it's going to be based on your interaction with the over 400 people that we have registered in the course, right? Starting on week 4, I guess, I have to go back to the syllabus, right? We're going to have guests. We're going to have guest speakers. We're going to have people that are working actively in solutions around democracy and climate change joining us and telling us about their experience, their findings, also their struggles, right? Where is the friction for them? Where is it that they are finding the bottlenecks? Where is the frustration? We may have a good idea, and yet people are not using it. Or the government doesn't want to help, right? Like, or is the private sector and the incentives in mining areas, for example, right? So we're going to talk about this problematic and try to think through as a group, right? And this is going to be in questions that we're going to be posing to all of you external participants too, right? Like, to participate with ideas, telling us who do you know that is doing the thing and that apparently is working out for them, right? So we can actually go and connect with them, interview them, ask them for more information about what they are proposing. This is completely experimental. We have never done this before. If it sounds complicated, it is, all right? I didn't say it was gonna be easy. That's a song, But it is important, and it's part of the whole process to actually learn about development in this sense. Finally, we're going to be looking about when we're thinking about a strategy, we have to make choices. We cannot do everything. We don't control all the levers, but we may understand what the key levers are and try to understand what are the minimal things that we can do to affect those levers in the system. That's where we get to the discussion of boundaries, hypotheses, theories of change, right? Like some people call, with some of these key questions that we're proposing for. And how acting on that theory of change should or could look like, or looks based on what others are doing. For those of you that are taking the class for credit here at the University of Maryland, okay, we're going to have like, for example, like big presentation slide decks with references, right? There is no single or group of mandatory readings for this. There are going to be a lot of recommended readings. And I'm very conscious, right, that you are not going to be able to go through all the readings. You, everybody, external participants will have access to that too. For specific chapters that may be helpful, we're going to provide those, right? We're going to make them available to all of you. Same for you, right? The decision of you reading them or not, right, is your thing. You're going to be evaluated not about how much you memorize about a particular set of readings, right? Or if you can quote it. The exam is completely open book. I shouldn't even mention this, but it's going to be completely open book. Because you are going to be evaluated based on your contribution to this discussion. That's what it's going to be. And we can discuss details and any questions that you may have about this in a moment. Okay? The key thing is going to be building a synthesis out of this. Now, it is not perfect, but now we have the opportunity also to use tools that we didn't have years ago, right? Like to be able to bring some sense on the chaos. But the use, for example, of AI for synthesis and all is not enough. It's helpful. It's going to help us to synthesize a lot of the thinking, but that is going to miss also a lot. So one of your roles, students here at the University of Maryland in that sense, is going to be as curators. So even if we are able to synthesize a lot of the significant amount of information that we're going to collect through this exercise, through AI, it goes to you to try to make sense of it based on what we are learning and discussing in class, and also based on the things that you have learned from other classes. Natira, I'm gonna ask you to go just to save some time, right? All this deck is gonna be shared with everybody, of course, okay? So very, very important, because I didn't mention this. This is the application one. Thank you so much. Why democracy and why climate, okay? So you may be working on a particular type of project on an organization on health, on education. Maybe you are working on youth, right? Like in youth development, right? But whatever the development program that you work on, right? Like you're working in a context where you may have a particular country or set of countries or a multilateral system, right? That is a reflection of limitations, failures in a democratic system, or may not be a democratic system at all. So instead of assuming that your course of action, your program, your initiative, right, like very nicely based on evidence, we're going to talk about evidence a lot, sets you on a pathway. If we do not understand the context in which we are living, right, and the choices that may limit or encourage, right, like then our program is going to have either limited effectiveness or may not be sustainable. Maybe things are working right now, and then a new administration comes and everything falls apart. And you know that I'm not only talking about countries in Latin America, Africa, or Asia. So the same with climate action. We talk about these tensions, right? Like, is it about development as jobs so people can sustain their families, right, with a particular guaranteed income, right? Or is it about protecting the environment where those people actually live? What is the priority? How are those arguments also used by people that have different incentives, right? Like to actually influence the course of action. I have seen contexts, right, in which literally like civil society organizations focus on jobs clash with civil society organizations in environment, for example, particularly in mining contexts. So how is it that we have a productive conversation about transition, energy transition, that is focusing fairness, injustice in a just energy transition, for example? And we'll learn from a few countries during the coming weeks. I'm gonna take a break in a little bit. 10 minutes, 5:30, we'll take a break. So next slide, please. So next week, we're gonna introduce a Miro board, okay? The Miro board is gonna be our main tool. This is gonna be a space that everybody here in the room, but also the external participants registered, are gonna have access to. It's gonna be a space where anybody is going to be able to contribute based on a series of questions that we're going to be asking every week. If you miss 1 week, external participant, and then you want to go back and answer some of the questions on the boxes, you can completely do that. There's going to be answers and suggestions on how to tackle a particular problem. There's going to be questions about like, who are the key stakeholders? There are going to be questions about the relevant system to the problem. There are going to be questions about examples, right, of organizations that you know that are trying and facing this particular challenge, or that are testing something innovative in terms of trying to solve a particular problem. Okay, so this Miro board, right, will be basically trying to go from understanding development for who are the key actors here, not only who is it that we are trying to help, right, but also who is it, right, like that is a key piece in the puzzle. Who do we need to engage? Right? Typically, we call them stakeholders. Language is very limited in development, I would say. All right. Then we're gonna try to understand to like on these different cases and interventions and policies and all, what seem to be the underlying assumptions, right? What are the sources of formal and informal power, right? In such a way that help us map the current system. One slide that I'm gonna show you in a moment is probably gonna be the most important slide in the whole semester. And I'm not joking, right? But the key point of that, the most important slide that I'm gonna show you in a moment, is one. When you do development, you are also altering the system. Why? Not only because of your own actions, but the actions, the reactions, being pushback or support that you elicit from others. If we do not acknowledge this and we think that our intervention happens in a vacuum, right? We're doomed. We're doomed. You may have good results for a few years. Your donor may even give you another round of funding, right? But that doesn't mean that you are actually changing things on the ground. And I'm sorry if it sounds a bit harsh in that sense. If you have examples that contradict that, please, by all means, you should mention it in the Miro board. That's the point. Remember, you're going to be able to see this. We're going to share all this with you. So don't worry if you miss something. The final output, next slide, please, right, is basically, we're going to move from a team output that is going to be generated basically by the students in the class, like interacting and collecting the inputs from different people. Everybody's going to sign their own contributions in the Miro board, right? So we can attribute them, right? You can also, you're going to have the space, for example, to ask questions. So basically, I don't understand this. What if we do this or we try something different? Do we need to connect with particular type of stakeholder or not? All that is welcome and all that helps. So the semester is going to end with a team output. This is your course project, this segment, right? So basically your exam is going to be making sense of the middle that is shared from your own perspective. Now, at the end of the course, the students that are present here in the room, right? Like they're bringing their own biases and their own perspectives on the problems. Based on everything that you have learned during the semester, what is your perspective now? You're going to still have your biases, right? Because the point is not for you to change your opinion, nor the point is for you to change your role. The point here is how is it that you will make a contribution to the conversation. So all that plus like the synthesis that we're gonna make of all the contributions from different people from around the world at different points in time, all right? We're gonna actually synthesize it as a team, and this is also as governance action hub. And you, right, like external participants and people present in the class, beyond the class, if you want to, this is not mandatory, this is gonna be after you get your grade. You get your grade and you decide, maybe you're happy and you just go on a summer vacation, go for it. Okay? But what we are gonna generate, and we would like you to share with you and help us edit, all right, is this meta synthesis, right? Which is basically a clean version of your output. And then this meta synthesis is going to be validated and contrasted in co-creation sessions live in at least 3 countries during the summer. So Tracy can actually share more information, but we're planning to go to the Philippines in June to have these co-creation sessions. We're planning also to in Zambia or Zimbabwe during the summer, and most likely one more, but needs to be confirmed yet with the partner in May in Morocco. So at least 3 opportunities to actually cross-validate and feed on what you are going to produce. When that is completed, right, this is going to be published. If you made a contribution, your name is going to be here. If you want it, maybe you are ashamed of it, or you say like, oh, this is horrible, I don't want to be associated with this. That's okay, all right? You already got your grades, you're already like out of it, maybe you graduated, okay? But I want you and you, right, to generate something that you feel proud of. That's the point. It may be great, it may be awful, but your contribution, I hope that you feel proud. Okay? I mean, let's make it count, all right? It's an opportunity in the end. You decide if you take it or not. So I'm gonna take a break here for about 10 minutes, all right? So we can relax, breathe. I'm here, I can answer questions. I'm gonna check also a bit of the Q&A that may be out there, unless Tracy and Atida have already shared a little bit of it, right? Please make us suggestions. How can we make this better? We're new at this too, all right? Maybe you have seen this before, right? And you have seen, oh my God, somebody tried something like this before and it didn't work for this. That is amazing information from us because we would like to do better, right? And there is a way in which we can actually make this work better for others. We'll take it. We're looking forward to it, right? Same with you guys. Very much looking forward to this. So we're going to take 10 minutes here in the class. What I'm going to ask you is that after those 10 minutes, based on your groups that we discussed in the beginning, I can put the slide in a moment again, right? Like I want you to separate and put on 2 sides of the class, okay? Because we're going to have a bit of an engagement. Take 10 minutes. In the meantime, I'm going to go and look at the chat here, and you can approach me also if you have specific questions. 10 minutes, and I'll see you back here in the classroom. All right? So I'm going to continue talking here to everybody, and now I can actually respond maybe to some of the things that I'm seeing in the chat, unless Tracy or Natida have already answered this. Okay, so I'm going back and so I'm answering really quick some of these questions. Okay, weird, but it's visible. Perfect. But now, I mean, like, I guess that everybody is seeing what we're sharing. Right? Perfect. Ta. Thank you for the warm welcome. Emmanuel Tamba Johnny, Sierra Leone, West Africa. Thank you and welcome. Deomini Danieli, joining from Durham, North Carolina. Welcome. Welcome, Daniela. Macarena. A ver, Macarena. See, where are you joining us for? Washington, D.C., originally from Peru. Send me a message, please. We can share stories. So what else? Anuradha, public sector governance and management specialist, India. Welcome. I haven't been in India over, it's going to be 12 years. No, no, okay. 8, no, 9 years since last time I was in India. Miss it. Who else? Adamu Auta from Nigeria. We have a big following in Nigeria. I hope that we are able to go and visit and maybe organize something either in Abuja or Lagos later this year. We have an office also of the organization that is at the base of the Governance Action Hub, Resource for Development also. Who else we have? Lina Foya from Zimbabwe, Brett Aresco from in Fairhope, Alabama. My parents lived for some time in Mobile. Ana Beatriz, Brazilian but living in Argentina. Oh my goodness. Thank you for joining. San Francisco Bay Area, of course, you're 3 hours less. Good, excellent. Ecuador, Evelyn, welcome. Matilda. Sobeida, thank you for joining. I'm so glad that you're here. We have to talk especially about the Philippines. Kavya Kashyap from Chicago, right? Thank you, thank you. I'm not going to be able to mention everybody, but I'm very thankful for you to being here. I guess that also Nicola, thank you. Hi, Nico. Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. From Serbia. Thank you. Thank you for joining. Dolji from Dolgorja. Is the Dolgorja that I know from Mongolia? Luz Marina. Thank you, Luz Marina Pineda from Colombia. Anyway, this is great. So if there are any questions about what we have been proposing, please let us know. All right, we'll be happy to actually answer those questions either during the class or after. Again, this is completely experimental. I mean, we may be a little crazy even, right? It may not work, right? And it may not be for everyone. Hopefully, we'll be with you for you, and you are able to join us in this crazy endeavor. We're looking forward to generate something that makes sense and that is a contribution to the field over time. You're going to be exposed to a lot of very diverse ideas and material. Please send us examples. Tell us how this resonates with you or not. And again, if you have not been able to connect because of the time zone where you are and all, you know that you can review the materials starting tomorrow. You can always ask questions. And again, as I mentioned before, in case you were late, we will offer a Governance Action Hub Resource for Development certificate for people that regularly participate, but that will not be based on attendance. It will be based on passing a quiz at the end of the semester. So you will be able and have a chance to actually get your certificate based on that. You can look at the material at your own convenience, and we will have office hours too. So you can actually ask questions, or like if you want to organize with a friend, for example, or with a group of you want to discuss some of the problems and the challenges and propose some solutions, right? We can meet with you. We can have an online session also with you. Welcome. Hopefully people are enjoying this. We'll get started in about 5 minutes. Okay? Taking a break and I'm cutting you. Of course, Mario, you are muted. Thank you, Natita. Thank you for letting me know. All right, let's get started. All right, all that was introduction. So now we go to the real stuff. Okay. We're going to talk a lot about what is international development, right? Based also on your answers. Just for everybody to know, external participants, we had an entry survey for everybody that joined the class, right? Like trying to understand what is their preconceptions about development, like because not everybody is a development specialist or like trying to be become a development specialist here. People come from also different perspectives and different majors, right? Careers, like what you're trying to graduate from college. So one of the key things is that we're going to understand a little bit better this next week when we talk about the history of international development, right? And where is it that many of our biases over the years come from? But we tend to think about international development as a technical, very technical field, right? We have very much been talking about, well, there is a particular problem, how others have faced it, what is the evidence around it, then apply it, right? Most recently, there has been more of a discussion about how to adapt, right? A particular initiative or intervention and so, right? And the mindset is very much let's do it, let's assess, and if it's working, let's scale up. Okay? So there is sort of like an inherently linear thinking around development historically. Even with all the different and new things that we have learned over the decades, it has not been the same. It's not the same now than 2 years ago, and then it wasn't the same than 50 years ago. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that next week again. Okay? So, yeah, so typically when you think about the field, the first thing that now comes to mind is the closing of USAID last year, right? And it was a big shock. We cannot understate that, all right? Check a little bit about these numbers. This actually comes from a project called the Global Aid Freeze that is led by our friends at Accountability Lab together with Momentum. And you can actually go and check their website. They're doing a great job. Regularly, they keep updating and launching these global surveys to try to understand live the impact of USAID closing, but also all the limitations in terms of funding around development. Okay? You can go and look at the numbers. I'm not going to go through each one of them. You're going to receive among these slides also one page where you have the links to all the references. So you can actually go through them. The same for you, external participant. Okay? So now, one thing is what we saw last year, right? Immediately after the closures. But what we sometimes do not understand is the prediction based on what follows. And hopefully this is dramatic enough to show you, right, the impact of what happened. This is obviously not only USAID, but everything that is happening, even the geopolitics around development, right, like mean that a lot of resources from other countries too are going into other things, including defense, included but not limited to defense, right? The whole discussion about like is NATO viable or not, or what is the new state of NATO, right? Like is also affecting development, of course, because if Sweden, France, Norway, Germany, like start dedicating more resources on their budget, right, like to defense, what is going to happen is that they're going to have to take that from somewhere, right? And guess which one is an easy one? Because it doesn't affect directly their constituencies voting in those countries. Yeah, development, even though it is not that much, actually, in terms of the GDP of each one of these countries. And if somebody says other thing, it's not true. All right, we got the numbers. Okay. So you can go a little bit about this, right? But again, it's a domino effect. It's not only the reduction in official development assistance, but like the defense and military spending, right? Like when you have, for example, domestic refugee costs, right? Like the whole system is changing. Even if you say even if it is not the main source, right, of a problem right now, right? Like think in terms of remittances, for example, from people that were working in the US or in Europe in the last few years, right? With the challenges and the tackling on immigration right now, people are hiding in many of our communities. We discussed it at the beginning before you guys joined external participants, right? Like some people do not go to work for some time. Some people do not go to school. And certainly, nobody has done the measurement yet, I guess, but actually I may look for it. I just thought about it. Like, I mean, you can expect that remittances also go down. And they can be very strong source of income for families back home. Yeah. Hi, Martin from Uganda. So this is serious, right? And when I say that this also opens the opportunity to build back better, okay, right? And the concept of polyunity, right, that most recently has been more popularized by John and John Hopkins, right? Like it's something that we should consider, we should keep in mind, okay? You can check on John Yang. Actually, she's not the origin. There was a concept that came from before, and I'm going to look at the reference, right? Like that. But the point that she tries to make, right, is that in a crisis, right, these structures of power crack, right, and these actually create polyunities, disperse opportunities to intervene and redesign institutions that were previously untouchable. Things like the entire multilateral system right now, right? And the way, for example, that international development banks work, right? Like necessary change. Those multilateral banks, the IDB, the World Bank, right? You ask people working there right now, right? Like they are also trying to adapt and survive in a particular environment, right? Where their boards are dominated by some of the same countries that are trying to curtail aid within the United States. So how is it that you react, adapt, trying to still fulfill your mission? That is a balancing act where you have to make many compromises. But also that is increasingly incentivizing adaptation and some creativity in the way that they work together. And for example, when you think in terms of like swapping debt between multilaterals, and we're going to talk a lot about financing and financing strategies next week too, like then you can actually start seeing that while you have to adapt to the politics and geopolitics that affect you at the board level, right? You are also trying to get the work done, and you need to get a bit more creative. Like that works in everything, right? Like we have been struggling in development for many years, right? Like trying to push for the concept and the discussion and the need for further localization, right? USAID actually was one of the leaders in terms of trying localization happen. But that effort did not necessarily translate in everything that was expected expected from it, right? Again, some things that we're going to be looking at during the course of this class. Okay, but how is it that this particular problem opens this opportunity, right? There's like a lot of work going on, particularly on how we bring different perspectives together, not in like just a romanticized way, but actually as coalitions, practical coalitions of change. How is it that you are able to identify common problems between people that have not worked together in the past, try to accommodate, include not because it's morally right, but actually because it gets things done. Because if you do not include, you miss an opportunity. You miss an opportunity of actually get a particular perspective on the problem that you may not be considering. All this is part of the whole discussion around polyunity that Yuan and others have been pushing for during the last year in particular. If you go to LinkedIn and you follow a lot of people in development, you're going to see a lot of this discussion going on. All right. You're going to have an opportunity with the reference and all to delve a bit more into this concept and apply it to specific problems related to democracy and climate in this class. So, yes, It is time for planting, not for harvesting, right? Particularly like this unglamorous work of tilling the soil, burying the seeds, and waiting. And the problem is that many people do not have time to wait. And I'm talking about in terms of like the many beneficiaries of development, but also the organizations that are doing this planting. I don't know if I have a job beyond January next year because the funding that supports my work is going to run out. Like the original funders do not exist anymore. I don't know. Maybe I will, maybe not. I would love to be doing this until I retire, right? But maybe not. And there is actually an uncertainty there. But then each one of us, even in that uncertainty, have to make a decision, right? Like, do we try to just accommodate and do whatever we can, right? Or also, do we try to push forward and look at what it could, right? And actually present with a few concrete pathways to actually make things happen. For now, I'm choosing the second one. Ask me in a few months, I may be desperate. Okay? So for all the definitions that you're gonna find online, you know what? Use AI, I don't care, right? Like go Google, all right? And you're gonna see different definitions about development. You're gonna see the definition that goes around growth, about investment, about trade, about people and agency, right? Like you guys are in the school. I'm sure that everybody, if you haven't read Amartya Sen, you will at some point in international development, right? Particularly if you're at the School of Public Policy, right? And yet, right, as important as that concept is for everyone, right? Most of the times when we devise these different programs, right, like we're concentrated in very concrete indicators, in very concrete goals, right, in the indicators that fulfill or that help us realize or consider that we have achieved success. Success. And that success, it's an obsession. It's good to have an obsession of being successful at what you do. But the problem is that if the incentive is like just showing something to somebody so you can get the next check to continue your work, right? You're going to be faced with a few difficult decisions over time. So what I'm proposing here as a working definition, right? Don't take my word for granted. I'm not telling you to redefine development, and I'm not the one that is going to give you the ultimate definition of development. I'm not. I'm good, but I'm not that good. Okay? I propose you, right, that our working definition of development for this semester, right, is a process of change. A process of change towards societal goods, to societal goals. Goals that society, a given society, right, a given group, right, deems valuable. Now, as a group, right, within a government, for example, maybe in a government cabinet, that goal may be growth. Different time, maybe in the same country, right? Like one of the priorities is education and education reform. In others, it may be just sustaining or strengthening a theocracy. Okay. So these may actually vary. Like what is the societal goal and who gets to define it, right, is an important question here. So I get a lot into economic growth, right? And I'm gonna actually make a lot of puns during the semester about economic growth for two reasons. One, because I'm an economist and I'm cynical, right? I'm gonna be 50, so I know I don't look like it. But the truth is that, right, like for many years, we have been focusing so much about economic growth. And economic growth is incredibly important. I'm not saying that it is not, right? But we have to move beyond just the discussion or like the typical phrase that like economic growth is fundamental, but it's not enough. What does that mean? And how do we translate it into action? So sometimes, for example, economic growth, when we take it for granted or as the ultimate objective, right? it obscures issues like elite capture, fragility, social erosion. My own country, Peru, sorry guys, I don't like this. Somebody in the government is seeing maybe they want next week. That's okay. All right. I mean, like, we have to say we have had like one of the best economies in terms of like growth for many years. Julio Velarde, president of the Central Bank of Reserve of Peru for many years, somebody that I like when I was at the Central Bank of Reserve, I actually saw as like not a god, but somebody very important that you admire. Okay, and now he's still there, right? Like, he will go next month to PDAC, the biggest mining convention in the world in March, and I can tell you already what he's gonna say. He's gonna stress like how the growth in Peru is strong, which is a strong signal for investments to come to Peru. And yet, the country is a mess. Support for Congress between 2 and 3%. And those 2 or 3%, I don't know what Congress they are seeing. Support for the president going down all the time. Scandals, crime, large inequality, lots of tragedies every year because of cold weather or because landslides that will be preventable with a plan, with people doing something about it. And yet, as a country, we choose not to do it. 7 or 8 presidents in the last 6 years. I'm not joking. So what the goal that we are setting as ourselves to pursue is key. This makes it the most important thing to actually define what is it, what is the change that we want to see. Okay, so there are different ways in which we can look at development, right? Like over here, right? Like in this, for example, is based on your survey data, right? Like you see development as justice, as cooperation, as socioeconomic evolution, as community-defined change, right? Like, and that's very rich, right? But how is it that we build a strategy that takes us there? That's what this course is about. Next slide, okay? You're gonna hear me a lot talking about complexity. Complexity is not something that is complicated, all right? If you have the blueprint for a Ferrari, even you can build a Ferrari if you have enough money and the tools, right? But you have the blueprint, you can actually build a Ferrari, right? But when you are looking for societal change, moving the culture, right? Development, you are in a forest. And then in the forest, you may have a lot of maps that tell you this and that, etc., right? But maps, as we know, depending on the projection, they may be very deceiving, right? And they are very much based on the perspective and the place where you are actually looking at things. Now everybody talks about Greenland, right? Right? And now I hope that we have seen, because now everybody puts like, oh, actually Greenland is much smaller than I imagined, right? Or what I see in the map. Yeah, it's an issue of projection. But that's the point, right? Like that sometimes maps are deceiving or incomplete. Are we willing to take the chance to look at the problem from other perspectives and actually get into that jungle? And I'm not gonna lie to you, maybe you don't want to do that. All right. Maybe that actually makes your own life a bit more complicated. Maybe doing that doesn't fit with what your community of civil society organization or private sector leadership, right? Or economists tell you that the problem is and how to tackle it, right? But we're gonna challenge you a little bit on this. And hopefully you will see the value at the end of the road. There is this awesome concept of collective action. The problem is that with most of these amazing concepts, that go to a particular and important problem, right? We tend to simplify them over there. So they are chewable. So we can actually deal with them, right? Or so they can be an interesting side note on your major plan that you have already defined, that is the way out of a particular problem. So what happens when collective action, and let's use a different term here that is not the same, right? Participation, okay, is a key criteria in what you want to do. If it turns into just another add-on to what your big plan is, all right, what ends up is being just a checklist item. So then, if we don't do participation seriously, focus on engagement, on ownership, on unleashing agency, we'll talk about unleashing agency in this class. The challenge is that we end up just creating spaces for participation and not actually looking if those spaces are actually convening the people that need to be there. For years, we solved the concept of participatory budgeting. Big success in places like Brazil, for example, and everybody goes back to the Brazilian example. In Peru, for over 20 years, participatory budgeting is mandatory at the district level. Every district in Peru. And yet, people don't go to the meetings, not because they don't care. Sometimes they don't know that even happened. Or the people that go are typically the people that have most at stake, of course, or that perceive that is most at stake. And if you are somebody, like, let's say, a very poor household in a particular district, you have to work, do something during the day to bring some food to the table at night. And then we tell you, you have to go to the participatory budgeting meeting, which is a series of meetings, really, it's not just one. All right. And maybe you go once, and then your voice is actually not being respected or heard. Are you going to go the next time? Probably not, right? But that happens not only with participatory budgeting. Happens with many other things in the government. If you haven't looked at it, for example, we will have the opportunity to interact with this. And I assure you guys, while I'm not following every single of your comments here, like I will respond to them. There will be a follow-up, not to every single one maybe, right? But I will try to like consolidate some of these, all right? Thank you. So if you are gonna consider cooperation in development, right? Trying to bring together people that can contribute to the solution of a problem, regardless if it is people in a community, right? Maybe a multi-stakeholder group, another big term, right? We'll talk about EITI, for example, in their multi-stakeholder group design. We'll talk about multi-stakeholder groups in Peru, for example. I'm working a lot on that in 2 regions, in Moquegua and Cajamarca. So, like, it cannot just be a stamp that we're gonna do like a multi-stakeholder group, right? Like, this requires actually a design of the spaces for cooperation that responds to the particular problem. Example, all right? If you form a multi-stakeholder group in a mining region anywhere in the world, most places of the world, all right, that has a history of inequality, transactional-based engagement, and all, and you just put the space, maybe, I mean, you just hope for the best, something will happen. But what may happen also is that people go with a very aggressive point of view to the discussions, and they end up not cooperating because they are already used in a particular environment to just use those spaces only for transactions with the idea, what can I get out of this? And maybe the solution passes through everybody sacrificing something. So what do you do in those environments? we're actually going to hear from people that do this. Okay? So intentional design, right, like has to be present in the way that we look at the solution of a problem, not just copy paste. Okay? Now, another concept important in this class is going to be empathy. But again, not empathy because it's a nice to have thing. Right? Like the most important part or like dimension of empathy that we're going to consider here is the understanding that the other people that are key to solving a problem, right, may have a very different way of looking at the world than I do. And that is okay. Because if we do not accept that that is possible, right, faced with complexity, we are all going to go to our own bands, to our own tribes, right, and try to approach the problem in the same way that we have approached it for 30, 40, 50 years with barely results. We'll look into examples of these too. Another key concept to consider is the idea of friction. I mentioned friction a few times in the first part of the class, right? Like, and here I'm gonna draw a parallel, and I always say I read somewhere that anybody that compares anything in social sciences to physics is an idiot. So maybe I'm an idiot, like making this comparison in this parallel. Okay, but it's funny to see that historically, if you think about social sciences, the pretension of social sciences deep inside has been very much to follow the path of natural sciences, including physics, or try to replicate them. Just throwing a couple of things out there that will hopefully make interesting the class next week. Okay. We go through life trying to avoid friction. Nobody really likes conflict, right? Or like to be faced with information that contradicts the way that you understand the world. If you think about it, we talk a lot about polarization. Part of the issue of polarization is that right now we have infinite sources of information. So how do you face the problem of infinite sources of information? You go to the ones that you trust. And what are the basis for trust? Is it because that source of information challenges you in a productive way? Or is it that I'm just follow that because they believe what I believe? And what I'm believing is confirmed. That is a choice. That is a choice that we make. We make in life when we're following media, right? We're making life when we decide that what is happening right now in the US is right or if it is wrong. Okay, it is a decision. Are we able to try to understand where others are coming from, even if it hurts? That's the whole discussion about like Thanksgiving tables so on the country, right? But in physics, right, friction is good because without friction, there's no traction. Because friction is key for leverage. And leverage is how, if we are able to identify what are the key points in a system that we can influence over time, right, we may actually move forward. Maybe not in a transformational way at first, but with a strategy. We are going to learn in this class to do and to build theories of change. But theories of change are imperfect. Yes, you heard it here. Even if you have the most amazing theory of change map or graphic, right, that is going to be very impressive, right, it is always incomplete. It is always based on the assumptions that you have set up to do. It is a simplification of the world. That's why it's a theory. It's not a law. Even science doesn't do laws anymore, right? It was the law of I don't know, gravity, right? Newton laws, but Einstein is more complete, right? And it's a theory. At some point, science also stopped calling these laws because you are open more to the discussion that we accept it now because it works for what we want to explain. Eventually, maybe not. There may be something else. That humility is rarely found, even in development, particularly when development is done from Washington or London or Paris, etc. Okay, from the big centers. So we're going to go into theories of change, right? There is this great resource from Duncan Green that I'm going to give you the link so you can read and familiarize yourself with not only the book How Change Happens, which is great. I recommend that you read it, definitely, but also the material that he has online over the years talking precisely about theories of change. What is a theory of change in your mind? What do you think about when I mention theories of change?
I think you also wrote it on the board, but I definitely think of like a linear, like in science, if you're making a hypothesis, you'll say if then, and it's like your idea of a development outcome or goal, and then if you follow these certain steps that you can reach that goal, and there will be these impacts. So yeah, it's very like constrained, and it almost feels like what you said, like in a vacuum, which is not necessarily what reality is.
True. Now, do you know that originally those are the same things that an approach of theory of change and development was supposed to actually avoid? For years, right, like our discussions about development initiatives, programs, interventions were built about the logical framework. Anybody has a sense of like what's the difference between a logical framework and a theory of change? Please.
Maybe an ideological framework is more dogmatic, it's harder to change. And I mean, it's harder to navigate. Like a lot of people don't, are not that open-minded when it comes to politics, especially in this country. So maybe, from that viewpoint, you contrast it with theory of change, it's just harder to navigate or it's harder to manipulate.
Well, I mean, like a log frame is instrumental in an environment where your work is based on projects. It's simple. It's like a story of like how you go from point A to point B. It's based on a number, of course, of assumptions and theories behind, right? Like what is it? Okay, if I build a bridge here, right? I'm going to be connecting these two towns, and the economy of all these towns is going to be transformed. And I'm going to see that in terms of like trade, number of jobs, new businesses, etc. Okay. In a theory of change, you are actually more aware of what you don't know about the assumptions, or you're supposed to. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples. Okay. But at the most basic level, a theory of change is a theory about how things change. Crazy, right? So think about, I mean, like a historical example. Stalin, okay? If the question was, right, like how is it that we are able, or anybody like in Russia, for example, they were, or the Soviet Union at the time, right? Like they could actually defeat Stalin and take him out. What will be the way to do it? With an education program, maybe trying to sensibilize people, right, around something else, an election. What? Revolution? So what you see when the initial discussion about theories of change, particularly in development took place, this is a concept that comes not from development. But when we started to apply it, right, like we first embraced the idea of that the way to actually get change to happen may be different, right? Depending on what the problem is at stake, right? Maybe things change through revolutions. Maybe things change through socialization. Maybe things change through examples, right? Like pilots, projects, etc., etc. But over time, we ended up simplifying a framework for theories of change into these sets of boxes. I'm going to move forward from this. This is a bit, we'll talk about the concept of the strategy in a bit, okay? But if we truly want to understand how change happens, first, if it is a theory, I just talked about Newton laws versus the theory of relativity, right? If it is a theory, we need to be willing to accept that we may be wrong. We need to be able to have opportunity for adaptation to change. However, in this fast-paced world where the fact that you continue doing what you love doing and what you believe in, right? Like depends on somebody else seeing certain results that will guarantee that you will get additional funding, right? We tended for many years to cut in the edges, to take shortcuts, to make this as a convincing story, just that. But we were not taking it enough. Not everybody has this problem, obviously, but we don't do enough of a soul searching of maybe our theory of change needs to keep adapting. And the incentives to adapt were not necessarily there historically. If you see the whole like set of different donors out there, for example, people working in philanthropy and all, there are more and more openness actually for adaptation and experimentation now than even 5 years ago. But still, it is very ingrained, right? That your theory of change needs to be the solution because otherwise, why do I give you the money? I go with somebody else that have a more convincing story that this is actually going to change things. We struggle also with this, right? Like our program is in nature experimental, but that is not for everyone, right? Also because, let's face it, the problems are urgent. So this idea that we have to test and build and learn, the truth is like it's not for everybody. You probably need both. You need quick action to like maybe prevent things from getting worse, right? But at the same time, thinking in medium and longer term. How is it that you plant those seeds that we're talking at the beginning? So this may be a moment of planting. That doesn't mean that everybody should just plant. Because the audience is real, understandable. I'm not trying here to criticize everybody and say that I'm right. And you're gonna hear me a lot emphasizing nuance here. Nuance is not relativity. I'm never gonna try to relativize what others have done or do, right? Based on what their understanding of the problem and the options for a solution are, right? But we need to at least be able to open the conversation to other ways to tackle the problem. Not because they may be better, but they may be complementary. And they may actually help, right? All of them. So this is why, through this class, I'm proposing that while we're going to look at theories of change, all right, we're actually going to take one step beyond and we're going to think in terms of strategies. Okay? Strategy not as a plan, but as a process of becoming what we want to see, what we want to be as a collective, right? And what we want to see in the world. That process. A process that is based on an understanding of the prevailing system and the opportunity for changing it or building a new one over time. Okay? So I'm going to propose you and you a contract here. Okay? So this is our version of the social contract, all right? We're going to do the expedition contract, right? We talk about that. We're going to organize our research here, our joint research with the external participants too, around explorations, right? So this is not going to be a lecture series. What does it mean? That because this is the first class and because I'm compensating for a class lost last week, right? You heard me talk a lot, okay? So I talk a lot, all right? I'm sorry, I talk a lot, okay? But what is going to happen is that we're going to have much more interaction and engagement also with the middle board, first next week, and then more starting the third week. So progressively, you're going to notice that I'm going to cut myself from the conversation for my benefit and for your mental health too, okay? You don't want me to be the one dominating the conversation. And this has to do also with us, Tracy, Natira, Leah, like finding ways to facilitate that people that are joining live, but also the ones that see this after or during the week, are able to interact with each other, fill the middle board asynchronously, okay? Not necessarily during the class, right? Contribute to the middle board. And very importantly, that are able to, in the end, connect with some of the people in the class, right? With the groups that have been formed, okay? So these are the principles in terms of engagement, right? You can go and review them in a little bit, right? Like you're gonna have all this material with you. Humility, disagreement, collective learning, okay? So let's plan. This is the most important slide of the semester, as simple as it may seem. Okay? We are going to be talking about complex challenges. Complex challenges because in the end, they involve people. We may even be working for people that we strongly disagree with. If we were doing these development programs in the US and we disagree with one party or the other, right? Like, it doesn't matter. We're not doing this for one side or the other. We're doing this because we believe that what we're doing is right based on that engagement and understanding of the other. And we may be wrong. Okay? So we're going to see that when we talk about democracy, right? Or when we talk about climate, we're going to run into a lot of people also that do not believe that climate change is real. Or that they don't care about democracy because they are so disappointed. So we just push forward without considering that as a variable because they are going to see the light once we produce this amazing evidence-based program. And among all the things that you see, like when thinking about solutions to a wicked complex development program, right? The most important one may be here, right? We're going to talk about double and triple loops. We're going to talk about embrace complexity, system thinking, of course, right? But maybe the important one, the most important one, is the third one. Think about how you and your organization also contribute to the problem or to the solution. Because when we intervene in a system, the system responds. It doesn't stay the same. We are changing the system too. We are a new player or an existing one with a different strategy. And the system fights back. So we're going to talk about that, all right? existing and emerging systems. If Jorge Flores is hearing this, I don't know if he's connected, he'll enjoy that. Jorge will be one of our guests soon. I want you to go back to these slides during the week and think about what makes a good theory of change. Because again, we're not going to dismiss, despite everything that I have said, we're not dismissing the concept. It's a very useful concept. It helps us to organize our ideas. My goal is not for you to not do theory of change, but to think beyond a theory of change. So you still have to interact with them, and you're going to see them. Maybe it's going to be expected from a business proposal that you make, or is core to the work that you're going to be doing in an NGO, or with the World Bank, or anywhere else. Okay, so it is important that we understand it, we're familiar with it. Okay, but again, you can go through it, right? A roadmap from where you are to where you want to be. What would you need to consider when you build this plan? Yes, the state of things, the inputs you need, the activities you will implement. How do you inform that? What do you think? How do you decide what to do in the educational sector of Kazakhstan? How do you want to help, understand, improve, like the educational sector of Kazakhstan? Sorry if you're not from Kazakhstan. Have you thought about it? How do you go? What is the perspective to actually start thinking about the educational system in Kazakhstan? What does your intuition say?
First, to understand the incentive structure. Again, the structural barriers, for example, in many cases, leaders announces before election that we will bring some changes in education sector. The policy they are taking or announcing strategically heavily contradicts with the systems they have or the society they demand. Or for example, maybe I'm from Bangladesh. So we have an election in this month. So
if you can hear, we're talking about Bangladesh.
One of the leader, maybe he will own the election or not, but he was announcing that, okay, I will give tabs, these electronic devices for primary school children, this. But the problem is, whatever he is announcing or promising is not actually the reflections of the problems primary education systems Bangladesh has been suffering from for a longer period of time. The basic problem is governance. And that's without resolving is actually, whatever the education policy is, it's not going to work. Second is, he never thought whether providing some tabs is an effective policy or strategy or not for primary school children. We don't need, even in many cases, we don't need AI. If we consider climate change aspect, it needs a huge amount of groundwater. If we consider some big data center or a country where groundwater is depleting and we are not going to have fresh water in future, at the same time, we are proposing to construct some big data center that will actually contradictory to the core development agenda. This is also a problem. Another issue is maybe where the leaders are proposing some solutions or analytical frameworks. It is too complicated, but to solve this problem, we don't need that complicated structure. Even in some cases, maybe they don't consider whether we as a human being can efficiently predict the future, even in a lead time of 6 months or 2 years. It's not possible. So these are the problems.
I'm going to ask really quick. I don't know, Tracy and Atira, if the volume helps. Otherwise, for example, I'll bring a microphone next week, right? But Yusuf was here giving us like a very complete discussion of things to consider, right? Oh, excellent. The sound is good. They help me. So awesome. About like challenges, entry points, considerations around education reform in Bangladesh, right? And I was very excited when I heard you because I actually heard the three lenses that we're going to use in our discussion strategy. We're going to use three major lenses. And I'll just mention the lenses and I'll pass to you. Oh, you have a question? You
No,
have
you're good.
I'm good? Okay. Systems, governance, and evidence. Those are going to be three lenses that we're going to use. They are not the only ones that we could use, right? But systems is usually used in a too technical way, in such a way that does not necessarily, and I'm sure that many of you actually try to do it like in the best way possible and adapt it, right? Like, but the way that we learn and use systems is still in development, right? Is very basic and very much based on our own understanding of what the relevant system is. But the relevant system for me about the education system in Bangladesh may be different, even if I was Bangladeshi, even if everybody here was Bangladeshi, okay? Let's imagine that for a second. Like, you are going to have a different understanding of the relevant system to get things done, to change things in the education system in Bangladesh. Evidence is probably the most obvious, right? Like, and that's actually one that is non-controversial in general, right? You have tons of rigorous evaluations on education programs from around the world. I used to work at 3IE at some point, I3IE. And it's like mainly we work with randomized controlled trials. And we have these amazing evidence gap maps, right? Like that were produced, they still produce them, check them out. I have a few over there if they didn't delete many. But those actually maps, right, like give you a very rich understanding of like what many people have done from around the world in terms of education. Different areas of education. Attending, with the school, working with teachers, right, like the students, different levels of systems of pedagogy, etc., 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 right? Like, so if something works using randomized controlled trials and like looking at systematic reviews, which are basically the combination of the knowledge from different randomized controlled trials, right, or other mixed evaluations, mixed method evaluations, right, that are considered rigorous enough, okay? You make that, and you see that the average effect around the world of a particular action in the education sector like is this. So then we should apply it in a particular country or consider applying it in a particular country. That is non-controversial. That is actually very well accepted, right? Some people take it a bit too strict maybe or too literal, right? Others are more cautious and understand very well about some political implications that may have. But regardless, you can use that as a piece of in your argument, right? If you are talking to somebody that thinks different than you, right? And you're bringing the evidence, that evidence was not generated by you, right? It's conclusive and is generated by other people around the world and people that are credible. But that's what we know about vaccines, right? And even then, a lot of people decide not to vaccinate the kids, but that's okay. I mean, like they made that decision, right? Like it's so. But at the same time, some kind of behaviors, including vaccination, not only affect the person, they affect the overarching community. How do we interact with that complexity? So the evidence sometimes is not enough. That's why this understanding of the system is key. And even if you understand the system, how do you steer in it? How do you build governance that goes beyond structures? Just how do you organize the Ministry of Education? But also, right, if you are going to certain areas in a particular country, right, where you're trying to introduce a pedagogy, but the teacher is not there most of the month because they actually have to travel far to actually cash their check every month, and you miss 1 or 2 weeks of school, right? Like, so maybe the problem from your evidence was not that you were trying to correct. It's not the only solution that you have to consider. Or what happens if you lead a very important evidence-based education reform at all levels in a country like, say, Peru a few years ago? You are a minister of education, like highly educated, very technical, amazing person. Jaime. And the Congress in your country, in the end, makes you quit, or makes the president actually take you away and completely undo an important key reform for the country in a few years, just by rallying the sentiment of some people that those education reforms were actually harmful for their kids. So the importance of influencing behavior and support for a reform that you may believe in, that most people may believe in, all right, is something that you cannot stop considering. And that is also part of governance. All right, moving on from theory of change because we have to go, okay? And again, and I apologize, I have been like too much talking here, partially because I'm trying to compensate for 2 sessions. But I mean, like, you're gonna see that, especially the second, you're gonna see the difference, and the third, like, I'm gonna be talking much less because of the way that the classes are gonna be organized, okay? So these are just examples of theories of change, not because they are great, but because they are real. This was the original theory of change for my program that actually earned us winning the funding. I can tell you 5, maybe 7 problems with it. Many of them, most of them, were not obvious when we were designing the program. But now we have learned, and we adapted, and we changed the program over time. Partially also because the donor that we had, right, like, was actually encouraging us to reconsider if needed. But not everybody has either that kind of access or that consideration from, like, the donors that fund the project, or sometimes even worse, you do not think that you can actually do it. Fear, uncertainty, given the international development system over the years, right? Like, also affect the way, right, that we behave in the face of much needed changes. Okay, and I know that, I mean, I'm sure that people will disagree also with this, and that's fine. I mean, that's the point. We can disagree about it. Okay, that's my experience. So what typically you have is like this series of, like, statements aside of the graphic, which may be nicer or not, and you're gonna read it when you have that. You can read it, right? But these are the statements, these paths, right? Like, if we do this, then we can expect that, right? That is gonna be generating these particular results within the time frame of the period, right? And ultimately, this is gonna lead to this goal that we are pursuing. Good, this is good, this is important. It is not enough. I'm not saying that this is worthless. This is important. It is not enough. That's what I'm saying. That's why we're framing the conversation in terms of the strategies rather than theories of change. You're gonna hear here, this is from the from USAID, very good material, okay, related of the steps to building a theory of change, okay? We're gonna practice building a theory of change as part of our strategy process in the middleboard too. So don't worry, we're gonna go back to this in an applied way. But when you review, again, you don't have readings for next week. Your reading is this slide deck. I'm sharing it tonight with all the references. You have to go, also you external participants that are gonna participate regularly in this class, right? Like, you're gonna get this and the syllabus too. right? Like, so you can decide also which sessions make more sense for you, right? But we're gonna keep asking you questions during the week about contributing to the Miro board with very specific questions, right? That way, your contribution can also be counted towards the collaborative product, okay? So you can go over these, like the different steps. I'm not gonna do that, all right? That will be repetitive, okay? This comes from USAID, you'll get all the references and you can go to the material and look a bit more about that, okay? We're gonna do like a very quick exercise, it's almost done, right? Like, but we're almost at time, 6:45, we have to stop, all right? But think about it when you are reviewing this, okay? This material. Microfinance. Microfinance program is one of the most studied strategies in development. And it has gone through several iterations and changes over time. One of my first jobs was actually doing the evaluation for a very small microfinance program, local, in Tamil Nadu, in India. It's an amazing experience, revealing, eye-opening, amazing experience. But then everything that you learn about microfinance, when it hits the rubber, like you see about all the problems, because even if your average effects to your microfinance intervention may have been positive, when you start to see the outliers and what is happening in terms of like the people that are left behind, right? For different reasons, including the relationship between castes, right? Then you understand things are not the same. Okay, and I would love if somebody has examples of this, please share them with us, right? Like in which you may have had a strategy or let's say a theory of change, right? A development intervention, very well staying informed in evidence, grounded in evidence, but then it didn't have the results that you expect. I bet that there are many stories like that in this group, okay? And what I'm gonna challenge you to do is that when you're going through this, start feeling this. You don't need to feel this exactly. You can print and just write, right? Or you can use an Excel sheet and just write it down, right? Like, what will be an intuitive strategy for a microfinance program? If you're not that familiar with microfinance, feel free to Google AI, please. Because the point here is like, I'm not trying like to have a whole session about microfinance. I'm just trying to show you the variety of perspectives that you may have even among this group and among this group, right? On microfinance. Okay? We will go back to this, but this is where we're going to start next week. All right? We're going to talk about what does it take to be an international development expert, right? Just to use a word out there. Okay? And why? And this is actually based on a very interesting, at the time, for me, revolutionary paper that came out from the World Bank in 2015, right? That acknowledged explicitly the biases of international development specialists, okay? And that deals with the idea of how we tend to willingly, like, take many of the theories of change of the programs that we implement or that we know at face value. Not because we are bad people, not because we are dumb, right? Because it becomes a practice, a guidance, because we need some certainty. And then that's why we willingly take sometimes theories at face value. Okay? This is a bit on the all day. I'm gonna go over this because we're gonna talk about the history of development next week, right? But go through it. These are a few resources showing contradictions in the way that we tackle concrete development challenges since the 50s. Okay? Since the 50s, but not earlier. Okay? And all this goes back to understanding, right? Not because we can prevent them, not because they are a bad thing, but because we need to be aware of our biases and also aware of the biases of the people that we need on board for things to actually work. So, confirmation bias, sunk cost biases, biases about the beneficiaries, about the poor. What is our understanding of who the poor are, right? And why is it that the poor behave so differently to what we expect them to based on our rational choice framework? But as important as all of those, the anti-complexity bias. That's why we have theories, to simplify the world, right? All right. So next week, we'll talk about theory of change and evidence in development theory, right? And to use it, it's going to be a hopefully entertaining enough way to look at the history of development. I'm not going to spend a whole class about history of development. I promise you, you can go and check a bunch of different resources that I'm going to give you, okay? But we're going to try to understand what is the connection between those biases that we may or not be aware that we have and the history of international development. So be present next week. I really hope that we can see each other. Everybody, I know that you may have to disconnect. That's okay. For the class, I'm staying until 7 for any questions that you may have. And I'll see you next week. All right. Thank you so much. Apologies for any technical issues that we may have. We're going to try to correct many of the things. If you have suggestions for us on how to do it better, please message me or message Tracy or Natida or Leah. Okay? Thank you so much. I'll see you next week. Good luck.